Cocaine Cowboys, the deadly rise of Ireland's drug lords in association with Crime World. The live show is on sale now. We're coming to Belfast's Waterfront studio on Saturday, April 27th. Check mcd.ie or venue for ticket details.
So, Nicola, you attended the court hearing remotely today, where a very well-known League of Ireland footballer who's also played for Celtic but originally from Northern Ireland, Paddy McCourt, was appealing against his conviction for sexual assault, and he was successful this morning.
Yeah, I'm really glad you know the details, the football-y details, because I wasn't so sure. I thought you knew he was a Northern Ireland footballer, all right. Do you remember this case? It came up around the summer and there was a couple of days of hearings. I
do remember it because like Paddy McCourt would have played for Shamrock Rovers, but he mostly played for Derry FC, which would be in the League of Ireland. Nicola,
again, thank you.
Be aware of this, but he was a very well-known player, and then he went on to play for Celtic, which, you know, most Irish people have support and have a good passing interest. So he would have been a well-known footballer, and it came to court. I remember it because it was one of those stories. A well-known footballer said
exactly, and that's probably why it got as much publicity as it did in a way. And interestingly, his solicitor has made some statements around why he got as much attention by the PSNI, but we'll get to that. So the case surrounded this incident in a bar in Derry on Waterloo Street, the 57 bar, on the 30th of January 2022, when a victim alleged that she was standing at the bar and somebody had put their hand up her skirt and down her neck, touched her bottom, right? Okay, and this was the incident. He was accused and brought to trial. He was found guilty in the district court, and he was given a suspended sentence, I think a 3-month suspended sentence, but also put on the sex offenders register for 5 years.
Yeah, I think it was in the magistrates' court, which is the equivalent of the district court, isn't it, up there?
Just explain this to me, because I've been trying to kind of get this right all morning. So the court judge was a district judge called Ted McGill. Yeah. But the magistrates' courts, I thought, were the upper ones. No, they're not. They're the district.
No,
are they?
The Crown Court would be the
Crown
Court,
of course, yeah.
So the magistrates' court would be the equivalent
of our district.
Yeah, and so basically the difference would be the primary difference would be there'd be no jury. Yeah. They're non-jury courts.
It's for lesser offences as well. I mean, here I'm sure it's exactly the same. In the north, they start in the lower level courts, and if the offences are deemed more serious, they go up to the central criminal or whatever. So anyway, that was basically the case, and he denied it completely.
Yeah, I mean, even at the time, I think probably the way it came out first, a footballer has been accused of this was the first thing, and that started breaking. And then I think just as he was about to become to court, or his solicitors released a statement denying it really strongly, which you don't always get in these cases. Like, you tend not to get communication in advance of a hearing. So I do remember that it was put out really, really strongly that there was nothing in this, and he was not guilty. But obviously then it went to court, and there was a couple of days of evidence, and he was convicted.
And there was a couple of things I think during that trial that's worth referring to. One of them was that there was DNA taken from this victim, from the lady, and it was taken from her dress or her thong. It was described in the court. And the evidence was that McCourt's DNA was not amongst this mixed DNA. Yeah. So his DNA wasn't there. And I do recall that the judge sort of said, DNA, basically evidence isn't necessarily infallible.
Yeah, I mean, an interesting perspective. Yeah, I mean, like, DNA is obviously being accepted routinely accepted in courts across the land now. When it was first introduced in Ireland, you're talking 20, 30 years ago, there was a number of times it was judged that it was not reliable. And ultimately, nothing is 100%. But DNA is giving you, a 1 in however many thousand percent chance. So, I mean, we're not going to go into those sort of probabilities and what that means, but it's sort of routinely accepted now, isn't it?
Well, it also it routinely sort of results in conviction for murder, which is like the most serious offence that anybody can be accused of, and which is only found, beyond reasonable doubt. So often in cases, so DNA is is what it is. It's certainly usually pretty much the
Well, it's certainly, in terms of building a picture of guilt, it would be taken into account. Maybe the judge would say in this case, just the absence of DNA doesn't prove he is innocent. However, it certainly would be something that would have to be considered, that it seemed like there was DNA found beyond the woman in question herself. And also, of course, she did not...
She didn't identify him. I was going to get onto that.
Yeah.
The victim wasn't able to identify who had committed the assault because essentially she had their back to him. She appears to have been facing the bar, and what happened directly behind her. The court was also told that the PSNI had sought and were granted a warrant under what's called the Investigatory Powers Act of 2016, and that enabled them to carry out secret mobile phone examination of McCourt's phone and surveillance of of what was happening in the traffic in the aftermath of the complaint. And his barrister at the time during the court case, Owen Devlin, said it was the first time that he had heard of such a warrant being granted for a case that was basically not involving terrorism.
Yeah.
So it seemed like a very draconian warrant to grant in a case which was ultimately
a district
on
court.
a minor assault.
Yeah, but I mean, exactly.
Minor sexual assault.
Yeah, I mean, still obviously a serious incident, but regarded as in terms of it wasn't,
on a scale, I think it was a minor.
Yeah, and it was being dealt with at a magistrate court. It wasn't going to be, of a more require a major prison sentence, really, even if convicted,
And then just, I suppose, the other thing was during the course of the trial, it was put to the investigating officer that the police had missed clear signpost chances, it was called, to interview another potential suspect. And that officer said that, it would appear so. He sort of agreed with that. And it was read to the court that this other suspect has now moved to Australia.
Yeah.
So, they were kind of the main things that came out. And nonetheless, McCourt was found guilty. And immediately after the case, his solicitors said they were going to appeal it. So this morning, and there was a statement issued last night, again unusual, but we'll get to that. This morning in the court case, basically Judge Philip Babington said that he was told basically that the prosecution weren't putting forward any evidence, so they weren't going to fight this appeal, basically. They were kind of walking away, their hands up. There was problems with some of the evidence. They had no evidence to offer in this appeal. Now, there was evidence given and key witnesses used in the original trial, but clearly they didn't have them for this appeal. I
think when they don't give evidence like that, they could have still given very rudimentary evidence, but really they're walking away from it deliberately, aren't they? That's a conscious decision to say, this isn't a case that we believe we can. I know they're not defending it as such, but this isn't something we can fight and win.
Exactly.
The PPS or the prosecution service basically in the north.
So they had applied for witness summonses, they said, but obviously then they don't have the witness to come forward. They don't have any case to give to the court. So Owen Devlin, that's the barrister, said that McCourt, and he's repeatedly said this, I think, during the case, that he accepts the injured party has been or had been sexually assaulted, was a victim of sexual assault at that bar that night, but that it wasn't by him. So he's always accepted that. So that was repeated today. Now, the judge basically said that McCourt was free to go and he was an innocent man.
Yeah, which I suppose would be the point for Paddy McCourt. He was given a suspended sentence, so he never served any time in prison, even when he was convicted. But it's that 2 words, that he's an innocent man, that is going to be the hugely important bit. And in fairness to Mr. McCourt, it's an absolutely huge difference, isn't it? Mm-hmm. For him to walk away without any stain on his character or any suspicion, which is what the judge has said. And of course, there can be cases where that, even if somebody's conviction is overturned, where that is not stated, but he is stating clearly, the judge here, that McCourt is an innocent man as he walks out of court.
And it's such an unusual thing. You don't hear this very often in appeals. And the case is, and hopefully we'll be able to dig deeper into some of the elements around it. But like 22 months of his life has been, firstly, he was charged and was facing charges. While I don't know very much about his career, what it seems is that McCourt is very happily in a relationship, in a marriage, in a partnership, whatever it is, and has been since he was a teenager. That would be a huge strain on any marriage, to be accused, to be convicted, to be placed on the sex offenders register when essentially you are, as the judge has said to him today, an innocent man. I mean, there isn't really, it's really hard on a guy to be accused of something like that and to be looked upon like something like that. And I do know that certainly there seemed to have been nothing ever kind of to suggest that McCourt was that kind of a guy. Anyone who knew him was like really surprised in the first place when he was charged with this. He was never a bit like that.
No, there was no, like, I'm sure there are other sports people and there's a cloud of suspicion surrounds them, and he wouldn't have been anything of that type. As well, you have to look at it in terms of his career. I mean, most footballers, as they retire, after they retire, the career route open to them is coaching at various levels, being involved in football teams one way or another. And, with a conviction like that, that's it. Yeah. I mean, there is nobody who's going to hire you under those circumstances, despite under any conditions.
Exactly. You still have the conviction whether or not you go to jail. Just because you haven't been to jail doesn't mean they're going to keep you on. In fact, the opposite, you'd imagine.
Exactly. And of course, footballers, like, that is what they're qualified to do. They're qualified to work with other people in community groups, in football clubs, where there's going to be young people, where there's going to be, of course, now more and more women, of course, in nearly all football clubs. And, that conviction would have stopped all of that for him. And then, he would have been left at, I think he's 39 now. So what is he going to do for the rest of his life, despite the fact he was never going to serve a day in jail otherwise? He would have been barred as a result of being on the sexual offenders register. He would have been barred even from, let alone working, but just participating or playing in groups. All of that could have been brought into consideration. So it's a real, of course, it's every man's worst nightmare, isn't it?
It sure is.
Yeah.
I mean, there's elements of this that, as I said, we get into again, especially with colleagues of ours from the north who may have a greater understanding of this than we do. But outside the court, his solicitor, Kieran Shields, said he had been failed by the PSNI, as had the victim.
Yeah.
And he said that he'd been shabbily treated by them and that he had been singled out due to who he is. Earlier in a statement that preceded this appeal, he said a grave miscarriage of justice had occurred in Derry District Court and that McCourt was actively targeted and thereafter single-mindedly pursued by the PSNI for conviction. I mean, that's quite it's obviously strong words and all the rest of it, but why are we seeing these kind of allegations coming in? Because he is a footballer or because of that sort of religious stroke other divide that still is embedded really in Northern Ireland?
Well, I mean, the solicitor probably would have to clarify exactly what he means.
And maybe he has in a lengthier statement. But
I think there is an issue in terms of for the PSNI part of the UK's police forces, they've gone through a lot of, I suppose, criticism for how they treated celebrities in the past. Obviously,
and in the past, how they treated Catholics.
So both.
Yeah.
But, there's been a lot of things where they were, celebrities get easy treatment. There's been a lot of those sort of criticisms. So maybe that's what he's referring to, that because he's a footballer, a person of high profile, that they want to be seen to be going after these guys, certainly effectively using sort of anti-terror, anti-gangland legislation to look through his phone would be very unusual for a crime of that nature. So maybe his solicitor feels that they, pursued him too vigorously, given the fact that he was a person in the public eye. Obviously, the Jimmy Savile and all of that, there was huge criticism of the police in the UK about not by people saying that the celebrity of individuals meant that they didn't get pursued in the same way an ordinary person would. But clearly, in this case, Paddy McCourt is allowed to have his opinion, because his life will have been effectively, it would have felt like it was over following that conviction. And he's allowed to have a strong opinion and have a strong belief about why he was
targeted.
And, maybe we'll hear more over time.
Yeah. I mean, it would be interesting to dig further into that and to kind of, have a proper look at exactly what happened that night, what evidence there is of what happened. I mean,
was there CCTV mentioned?
There was CCTV, yeah. I mean, there was CCTV mentioned, and there is certainly 2 individuals in the CCTV. It appears one individual was standing directly behind her, which is exactly where the incident occurred, whereas Paddy McCourt was standing to her left or her right, one side, whichever. And that this other individual who the defence representing McCourt would have suggested was a suspect. Obviously, it was put to the officer in the court that he was a suspect and that he was, he basically was never questioned, and the officer agreed.
Yeah.
So, in other words, there was 2 people close to her at the time, and the other individual, I'm not going to name him, but he was seen as a suspect. In agreement, the PSNI have said yes, or certainly their officer who was in the box during the court case has said yes, and he was allowed to slip away to Australia.
Yeah.
So it is quite an unusual case, and maybe we will hear some more about it and be able to dig deeper into a little bit of those allegations that are happening. What happens next? I mean, this isn't going to sit here. There's presumably going to be further. I mean, is there going to be civil proceedings? Is there going to be?
Well, there's a history of like the police are allowed to bring cases that in which a verdict of not guilty is ultimately being found. I'm sure Paddy McCourt says his life has been overturned, but sometimes these civil cases are difficult to bring because as long as the police acted in good faith and they brought a case to the PPS or the DPP or whatever the case may be, and it was heard in an open court. I mean, it can't be a case that everybody who's accused and found not guilty can sue the state either. I think that there is a recognition of that. I'm sure that's cold comfort to Paddy McCourt, of course, who'll feel justifiably that his life was nearly destroyed, and if this appeal hadn't been successful, he would have had that hanging over him forever. But yeah,
and the PSNI themselves, it remains to be seen if they investigate, or the police ombudsman maybe perhaps investigates what happened in this case.
I mean, it's not dissimilar to a case we had down here involving Sil Fox. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Where he, he was ultimately found not guilty, and the case was brought to court, and he really felt that because of the fact he was in the public eye and a well-known person, and he really felt that he was targeted unfairly, and he was again vindicated in court. So look, you can only, I mean, the idea of being in that situation must be horrific,
Yeah. One of the downsides, perhaps, of being a celebrity. So, Niall, thanks a million.
Thank you very much, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.